to made me want to continue to serve, and it definitely made me want to become a judge. But here's the thing: as a judge, you're not advocating for either side, right? You have a neutral position, so that's an adjustment. But I did want to continue to serve. I could serve one by one, one client at a time, or I could sit and make sure that everyone who appeared before me received justice. So I would say living in a marginalized community and representing people in a marginalized community, I feel like it was, I don't even know if it was a choice or if it chose me. Like, I cannot think of anything else that I wanted to do growing up. I went to law school thinking about it. I didn't know it was called public defender, but I think that representing that community and that group of people definitely made me want to see justice have a wider net. So yeah, that would be my motivation.
Judge Evangelista.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I was a deputy public defender for about 17, almost 18 years. And I spent a lot of time in the courtroom. A lot. And I spent a lot of time telling my client stories to the jury. I tried a lot of cases. And part of my job was to help people who were probably from a different background than my client understand their story and what happened. And one, and two, to help my client be seen outside of whatever possible imaginary box the jurors may have put them in. And I did it for a long time. And one day, as I'm going through my own struggles as a person of color and not quite having the adequate vocabulary to explain or to understand what's happening to me, right? I realized that what was happening to them was happening to me. And I had a law degree, right? So I had put myself in a different box, right? Right. And when I realized that, I got to say, I got pretty, a whole bunch of emotions, but most importantly, realizing that people saw me in a box, and it wasn't just the judges, right? And it wasn't just this person or that person. It was at work. How does a woman advance, right? How do you go this long being in an office and not being in a managerial position? It was a lot. And then I realized I spent an inordinate amount of time in the courtroom thinking about seeing people and being seen. And one day it just became my time, my day to realize that people had never asked me what my story was. And that's when the idea came to me, and I just realized that it was time to be seen in my entirety. I wasn't just a public defender. I just wasn't just good at cross-examining. I could do a lot of other things too. And I wasn't seeing me for everything that I was. And I realized that judges have that flexibility. They're not in a box. They're not advocating for one side or another. So that's kind of how the thought came to me, because initially I had not thought about being a judge when I went to law school.
Thank you. Judge Shen?
Yeah, hello. I am so honored to be part of this panel. I feel slightly inadequate since I've only been on the bench for less than a year to be with such amazing people. I have Judge Brown's book on my nightstand. I've had it for a while. I think representing people of color, indigent communities, that seeing how they experience the courtroom, advocating for them. I mean, I started in public interest law because I felt like I had found my voice, and the best thing I could do with that was provide a voice to other people who had so much at stake. In dependency, they have their children at stake, which is huge. It's often sometimes much a bigger deal to them than when I was a public defender, but when they have their freedom at stake, that's huge. and you think, how could you even go up from that? And for some of them, their children at stake is even bigger. And so they have so much at stake, but they don't feel like they have the voice to speak up for themselves and to fight for the things that mean so much to them. And so I thought, what better use of my voice than to use that in advocating for other people, and hence doing that for a long time as a lawyer in different areas. But I think then you start to see how they experience the courtroom. Having an advocate beside them who can speak up and be their voice, that's meaningful to them, but that's like one person believed in me. Seeing the judge and how the judge treats them and their experience with the judge, that's like, this is how the system treats me. This is how I experience justice. It's not just, I mean, sure, there are some who are really thankful or appreciative or not that they have an advocate who is speaking up for them, but that's your job. And versus the judge is really was really so important in whether or not a person felt heard and whether or not they felt like whatever result came out of their case was a just one, was one that they could accept. And I thought, I've now appeared in front of enough different judges, enough different courtrooms. I feel like I could be that person who can make people feel heard. And I've done a lot of the speaking. I've used my voice plenty. And now it's time to really use my ears, use my decision-making capabilities, and empathy, and show them that justice is really for everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I want to piggyback off that, particularly Judge Evangelista's point regarding being fully seen, and how that kind of ties with adversity. So, it can be a lot of different things, right? Something huge, but oftentimes microaggressions. And kind of talking about and thinking about it in the context of intersectionality, right? Of being a woman, being young, being your gender, your race, whatever combination, possibly your sexual orientation, it goes on. So how have you all been able to handle adversity? And I say this also in the context of, sometimes in the workplace, you don't always have the flexibility to push back, right? Like maybe you're experiencing this from someone who, like another associate, or you're experiencing it from your supervisor, or maybe from the judge, right? And oftentimes when you're representing someone who is, indigent, they're already up against the odds, and you don't want to hurt your client's chances by pissing off the judge. So how have you been able to navigate that? And how have you been able to kind of strike that balance of advocating for yourself, but also recognizing, okay, maybe this isn't a situation where I'm able to do that, unfortunately? So we'll start with, I don't know, Judge Chen.
Sorry, I'm going to try to get this question right. So how has our experience of hardship ourselves?
How have you been able to navigate adversity, whether it's something huge or it's like things like microaggressions that might affect your day-to-day?
I think being a woman of color, being someone who, and this is not as a brag, who has been told that I look young, it motivates you to have to put forward your best foot, to show your competence, to do your very best, because other people can make you feel like there's something you have to prove. And in order to be listened to be taken seriously, I think all I knew how to do, and perhaps I'm still learning, is just to consistently show up and do the very best job that I could and show them that I wasn't any lesser. In fact, in many times you want to be better than do the job better than everybody else around you, so as to earn the respect that they may not be naturally giving you because of what you look like, because of what they might assume about you. So I think that as a young attorney felt like and could feel like a burden of having to constantly weigh that and not going in with a comfort level of I'm just here to advocate for my client. It's also I'm here to advocate for my client, but in order to advocate for my client, I also have to be highly aware of how people are seeing me and conscious of am I operating at my very best all the time. So I think there's this feeling of being on and watched and sort of needing to prove yourself that has to be overcome, because if you sort of overcompensate for it, it will backfire.
Do you mind if I weigh in?
Go right ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say I wanted to talk about the microaggressions and that intersectionality of when you're a woman of color, and when you're young, you may not even know what the aggression is. Is it because I'm young? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm a woman of color? Sometimes you may not even know. And the good news is you don't have to know. It doesn't matter. The point is how you're going to respond to it. And we've all could tell stories all day about microaggressions when, as lawyers, but even as a judge, I remember sitting, at 41 years old, I'm a young judge, I'm a new judge. And I had a lawyer come in who was much older, and he said, I've been in this county for 40 years and we've never done it this way. So in my mind, I was like, there's a couple ways I could respond to this. And and this is my principle. I always acknowledge it, even if it's not head on. Sometimes as an attorney, we're head on and we're going to go after it. Sometimes you have to be more subtle. And sometimes what I do is I acknowledge it, maybe even if it's subtle. Mr. XYZ, I certainly appreciate that you have all this experience that you're bringing into the courtroom, but today, this is how we're going to do it in this courtroom. And I would certainly appreciate any feedback or any, bring your experience to the table. So one, I'm letting him know I hear you when I see you, but this is my courtroom. So sometimes, my principle is always acknowledge it, even if it's not head on and aggressive. Sometimes it has to be subtle, but I acknowledge it and I move forward and I move on. And sitting as a judge, I've learned that your words carry so much weight that you need to be mindful that you are not saying it in a way that is too aggressive, because when you're a judge, your words carry so much more weight. Anything I said as an attorney, I could not say the same thing as a judge because it carries so much more weight. So for me, I always try to acknowledge it, even if it's not in the moment. Maybe I circle back and acknowledge it, but I try to acknowledge it and rise above it and just go on with what I am supposed to be doing, instead of getting bogged down in the weeds of how am I going to fight this, or getting caught up in my emotions. But just acknowledging it and rising above it and moving forward, which is, I have to admit, easier as a judge than it was as an attorney.
Judge Evangelista?
So I'm going to take a different approach to the answer here. As I've gotten older, I've leaned more into understanding why people are biased and why people have implicit biases. Why are people racist? Why are people tribal? Why are people people? And the more I lean into wanting to understand genuinely why people feel that way, has made me more empathetic to people, and thereby diminished or radically changed what kind of response I'm going to take when that happens. It's not going to be an angry, spiteful, or, you know, as Judge Brown said, it's not going to be that in your face litigator response, right? It's going to be maybe even from a point of understanding. If you want to take it to its full extent, maybe even more of a strategic response, right? You understand somebody, the really why they feel the way they feel or what they think the way they think, then the response, I think, is no longer anger. It's more of like, oh, I feel sorry for you, or, oh, I can see how you might feel that way if I was you and I had your background and upbringing. So giving people space, even in my own mind, has radically changed the way I respond, right? Which is more than anything, I would say, because I know who I am, right? It's healthy for me. Because being a public defender, it took years off my life, right? So that's why I'm leaning into this kind of a more of a philosophical kind of understanding human nature way of thinking, right? It makes me feel better. Yeah.
So this is a similar, slightly more targeted question, which is, how can women, particularly women of color, advocate for themselves in both non-diverse and diverse environments? You know, to some degree, are there steps that you either took in your career or wish you had taken to better advocate for yourself? And when we were talking, Judge Evangelista, you mentioned that you made specific changes in order to pursue a management position in the public defender's office. So perhaps you can start us off talking about that.
It's such a great topic, and it's a scary topic to talk about, right? You know, when I used to think about what management is like at my office or anybody else's office, right, is that some spaceship or some beam is going to come to you someday and acknowledge how brilliant you are and going to invite you, you know, to be that. And I was so just confused about that process, right? Also, layer on top of that, just how are people viewing me, right? Like in the courtroom, I viewed one way. Am I being viewed as somebody who can manage people versus just have viewed as, even by my peers, as a litigator? Like, do we want her as a manager? She's just a litigator. She's aggressive. She's this, she's that, right? So it's tough. But what I tell people is, of course, if you want something, you have to figure out how to get it, right? How have others done it? One, that's one way. Two, can you find somebody who can advocate for you and help you do that? Three, I would say, in a very concrete way, let's say it's something like asking for a raise, or asking, even if it's for a title bump, right? Figure out what the most important thing is for your boss. The very most important thing. And figure out how you provide that. Now, whether that means you're going to go dig up statistics or have your percentages ready, or figure out, you know, how many cases you've done of this type and what the results are, whatever it is, that's the most important thing. Figure out how you can present yourself as not just essential, but vital to the interest of your employer, and be able to sell that and market it, whether it's inviting, you know, a cup of coffee, or inviting, you want to go old school, a martini, whatever it is, whatever the right structure, whatever the right way to communicate that is, whether it's to have a lunch dinner, a lunch meeting, or a dinner meeting, whatever that is, and have your stats ready and make them commit. So whether it's committing to telling you what you need to do to get X, Y, and Z, they need to commit to telling you. And then you're going to follow up with email and say, thank you for letting me know that the 3 things I need to do to get this done or to get this promotion is this. I'm on it. I'm there. I'll see you there. You might even get admiration for it, really. You know, and I know not every firm or whatever is structured that way to give you an opportunity, but you have to advocate for yourself or find somebody that can help you.
Judge Brown.
Yes, I was going to say, I love what you said, and I want to take it a step further, because what we're talking about is when you're advocating for yourself, number one, what are you advocating for? What is it that you want? So I'm just going to give this free piece of advice to all you young lawyers out there. This is my free advice, my sidebar advice to you. When you start this job, I don't care how long you've been doing it, if you just started or a few years in, figure out how you plan to exit from where you are. Meaning, do you want a promotion? Is there a place within your firm or organization that you want to work in? Do you want to leave? Like I never had an exit plan for the public defender's office. The judgeship came up, but for management, I was like, I think I'd like to do that. So I had to learn the language and the culture of that, but I knew that going in. So I began very early keeping stats, keeping, how many trials I'd done. And if you want to be a judge, just free advice again, keep your stats, the cases, the big cases you've had, the cases, even if you didn't win them, keep in contact with opposing counsel. What I'm saying is be strategic from the start. I didn't do that as a lawyer, but going in as a judge, I said, I'm going to do this for 10 years. And I want to do this position, and this position. If you go in knowing what you want to do and how you want to exit, then you start gathering information. Okay, to be supervisor, I need to have this, this, and this. And then you can employ Judge Evangelista's advice, and that is, who's doing what you want to do? What does it take? What are the 2 or 3 things that I need to do? For my office to be on the homicide team, you had to have certain statistics, right? Certain things. So start getting those early. Don't wait until you're 5-10 years in. Day one, I want to be here 15 years, or I want to be promoted. You need to know what you want to do going in. And that way, the plan and the strategic plan and who you meet will be so much easier for you. So I hope you all can take that to heart and think about your exit plan on day one, or your promotion plan from day one. Let me just say this. If you don't, you'll end up being in the same place your entire career, and that is not fun.
And I would echo everything that they said. I mean, those are things that I wish I knew earlier. And for all the possible millennials out there who may think that they don't know what they want. They don't know. I think one way to find the person a person who you can ask the questions to, who you can is think about as you're doing your job. What do I care? What do I really care about? What's important to me? Or what makes me passionate about this? Like, what aspect of this job makes me passionate? Or what aspect of this job kind of frustrates me that I would like to see changed or improved? Then you find the person who's the most logical, who you could say, hey, I would really like to see more diversity or more support for, and then you go to the diversity person, or, whoever you think is working on that issue. Or for me, it was like sort of, I want to see our clients connected to more community outreach things. So if there's not a person there to make it happen, then talk to the person who can make that happen. Or if there's somebody who seems already interested in that field, then maybe that's the person you sort of want to ally with and talk to and start to figure out, what is it that you are doing? How have you been working on this area, in this area? And what can I do to sort of further that? Kind of show that you're willing to take initiative, show that you care about certain aspects that you either, want to improve or get more involved in. And then it's easier to sort of, if you're not like positive of exactly what you want to do, then just start to think about, well, what are the parts of my job that I either really care about the most or really wish were a little bit different, or, were different, and then start there.
Yeah, that all makes sense, and thank you so much for the responses, because that was very, very helpful to think about. And so now we're going to pivot to individual questions based on everyone's, varying experience. And I'm going to start with Judge Evangelista. So like I mentioned, you were elected via ballot to San Francisco Superior. Before that, you had run for judge against an incumbent, Judge Carnell. And obviously that was very controversial. I mean, in San Francisco, a lot of things happen. So it's not shocking, but there was a lot of pushback when you were running against incumbent judges, right? A lot of people were saying, well, this is blatantly political, and I saw that there's the responses, well, judges are appointed by governors, so that's political too, right? So there was a lot of back and forth around that, and so we wanted to ask you, what has that experience been like transitioning to the bench, as someone who was elected via ballot? And of course, just for context for folks, there was a slate of other folks running, on the ballot. So Judge Tong was also elected, and Judge Gold, who was a tenant attorney, was also elected at that time as well. So that's some helpful context in terms of what was going on at that time. But yeah, can you give us some insight into what that process has been like, and your experience overall over the last several years as judge now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having the courage to ask me that question. I never like having the elephant in the room. I actually like talking about the topic. So there was 2 races. The first one, there's 4 public defenders that ran, and I was one of the public defenders that ran against a sitting judge and incumbent. And when I ran the first time, really, it was in its more purest sense, felt like such an expression of knowing for me that it had been 20 years since another Latina had been appointed. And, and she went to Yale and is just Bolanos. And she had all of this help from the vice president, and she was brilliant. And yet still she needed all that help to make it on. And there had not been another Latina judge appointed to the bench. In San Francisco, we have 4 Latinas on the bench, 4 Latinos on the bench, and 3 of them were elected. Right? So knowing that if I wanted to do it, it had to be some other way. 1. 2, there was a little bit of a perversion of, for the idea to not see yourself represented on the bench, for me was, in a way, for the election as a form of free speech, asking the voters to see me and hear me, right? And what we see and hear now, when there are these attacks on the bench, for me feels like a complete perversion of what my feelings were when I ran, right? Representation, diversity. And it does seem like some of the attacks on the bench now that you see is the complete opposite. Now, having said that, 4 seats were left open, and I ran again when the 4 seats were left open after the first election, and I won that seat. And I knew I was neither naive nor was I was extremely humbled by the fact that I understood that when you care about somebody, when you love somebody, when you love a career, as a judge does, that you're going to care about those on the bench with you tremendously. And so I came in with a tremendous amount of humility, understanding that I had, at best case scenario, ruffled feathers, and worst case scenario, really angered a lot of people. Truth is not everybody was angry. Some people understood, but couldn't support me. A wide range of variety of thoughts and feelings from my colleagues coming in. But I knew I needed to be humble. And I took the position that if I wanted my colleagues to embrace me, to love me, and to get to know me, that I needed to go out of my way to put my needs and feelings aside and give to my colleagues what I wanted so desperately. I didn't come in here to demand anything from anybody, but rather I needed to be humble and understand not just the culture, but individuals. My brothers and sisters on the bench now, people who were out there holding signs for my opponent, like I needed to come up and say, hey, my brother, I know you're angry. Hey, sister, I know you're livid. I'm going to give you the space to tell me, and I need to just sit here and listen to it. And I did actually have the opportunity to do that with the people that were willing to do it. And like I said, not everybody was angry. Some people were like, you know what? Life's complicated. Politics is complicated. So that's been my take on it. I've been on the bench now 4 years. Being a judge isn't easy, so you layer that on top of it. It makes things sometimes more difficult, but it's made me such a much better human being to put others' needs and feelings first, because that's hard to do when you're a lawyer, right? We're also strong and self-centered sometimes. As a judge, I had to put my colleagues first, and I've made such close friends of people that I could tell you, people that didn't want me here. And I gave them the space to be angry or the space just to get to know them, because that's the point of diversity. The diversity wasn't me. I wasn't the topping that was coming to save the court. The point is all of us sharing everything of who we are to make the bench and the city better. This is the best job I've ever had, right? So nothing this good is going to come easy, right? But I can tell you that people have really, as judges, right? You have to put your biases aside. And, when I really called my colleagues on it, they've done it. And they've embraced me, not instantly, but in a very organic, natural way. I'm very proud of my colleagues. I'm very proud of the work we do here. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being willing to share that with us. So Judge Chen, I have an entirely different question for you, which is, you have kind of a unique array of experience across many sectors. You've worked in dependency, you've worked as a deputy public defender, you worked for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit about your experiences in those positions and the benefits and drawbacks to women and women of color in those different sectors, and sort of choosing a career path in one of those sectors.
Yeah, I mean, my path was not planned out to jump around, and I think that is some of the movement was related to becoming a wife, and my husband's job moving is becoming a mother, and taking time to not be in something that was so trial intensive. So it sort of organically happened that I was actually I started at a firm as a litigation firm, and then because I thought I need training coming out of law school, the paycheck's not bad too, but it was tied over to, I did a judicial clerkship, And then I did a federal clerkship and then went from the public defender's office because I thought, okay, well, the advocacy is what I really wanted to do. I just didn't feel ready to do it straight out of law school. And then really unexpectedly moved. I thought I'd stay at the public defender's office in Orange County for longer, moved to Sacramento for my husband's job, and that's where I worked for the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, specifically juvenile delinquency, the juvenile department, which is now, there aren't state juvenile facilities anymore, in part because of the lawsuits that were going on at that time. And it was more of an advisory role. It wasn't really defending, it was bringing them into compliance with some federal mandates federal court orders that had already been made. So ADA compliance, use of violence in the facilities, helping with a due process in the juvenile parole hearings. And that's where my first kid was born. My husband's job then moved us to Boston. I clerked for a dependency judge out there. I did community mediation. It was more flexible. But in all of it, I think when I put my application together to become a judge, I actually kind of thought, what am I qualified to do but be a judge? I've just got these like chunks of experience in all these different areas. And so they can't tell me like, you're totally unfamiliar. Well, actually I'm in family now, which is an area I did not practice, but people seem to think because of my dependency experience, I had like at least a little bit of overlap with family. But it's all to say, I think my advice is really don't feel like you can't go for big dreams just because your path hasn't taken you the traditional route. I think sometimes there is this fight of, well, I happen to think that women experience it more of how much do I sacrifice of my own career, my own path, my own needs for my children, my, husband, my family, whatever it might be. Sometimes it's parents who need help, and oftentimes it's the daughters who are coming in to help. Not always, there are sons who are very caring, but and to say that sometimes that's also as part of your experience. I know the judicial appointments secretary, he wanted to know that. He wanted to know, what was your involvement as a parent? It didn't have to be bar association events all the time because certain people aren't in that life stage. But in what ways did you care about the community around you? Did you use sort of the opportunities that you had, whether it's caring for an elderly parent or a younger child, or, doing volunteer work or community service work in the time where it was harder to have a 9-to-5 job, or I had just moved, so I was looking for a job at the same time. So I think I may have lost a slight track of that, but I think I think the advice would be coming out of my kind of varying experiences was just to embrace it, to do things always to look for work and that you love doing, that you care about, and to bring it together. And I think generally when you have a heart for people, when you have a heart for advocacy, it came together for me as a very simple story to tell. It wasn't like, well, I know I did, it looks like I did this and then I left and I did this and I left and I did this. But it was really this common thread of I care about the community, I care about advocating, and there were just different ways in which I expressed that, and when I moved or was in different settings.
Thank you. And Judge Brown, so in preparation for this panel, you had mentioned that now that you're still presiding over hearings, whatnot, in Santa Clara Superior, you feel the need to take less measured of an approach. So, when you were first starting, or not when you were first starting, but when you were on the bench, there was kind of like this dance or balance of, okay, this is when I'm going to go in hot / this is when I'm going to kind of, take a beat. And And so I thought that was really interesting because I think, again, this is like something that a lot of women, particularly, not particularly women of color, but women of color think about, right? Kind of what is the right moment to kind of push versus the right moment or appropriate moment to be more restrained. And so I wanted to ask you about your trajectory in terms of getting to that point where you now don't feel the need to do that. And also, I want to ask about how younger women of color, younger women, can unlearn that instinct, or maybe not, right? Like maybe this is something you can't really do when you're a fresh attorney. I personally think it's a good idea it sounded good to me to unlearn it as soon as possible. But I'm curious about your perspective on that and how to kind of get that, how to unlearn that if that is a good way to go when you're starting off and, maybe in the middle of your career, or even, trying to be on the bench and you're young.
And I'm sorry, I might have misheard you. Did you say unlearn?
Yes, unlearn the instinct to kind of be measured at times. And to me, it seemed like that was a good thing to unlearn, but maybe not. Maybe that's a luxury that, you just can't have when you're first starting off.
Okay, so let me answer it in this way, and I hope that I'm understanding your question correctly. So because I'm at the end of my career, it's so crazy. I did a commencement speech for law school, and I was looking out at the young people, and I thought, oh my God, I cannot believe not only did I graduate, I've had the career, I've had the judicial career, and I'm retired. It is crazy to me to think about how fast time goes. But with that, I have this unique perspective looking back. And so I hope that something that I say will help some of you, you younger lawyers, with regard to, as you plan your career, you're being strategic. We talked about, Vina, you talked about this instinct and whether you have to unlearn it. I think I would say that there are just two particular things that will help you in deciding how you need to approach things. And that is, there are always going to be obstacles, some that are going to be external, which women of all ages, races, we all know that there's going to be obstacles that are out there. But there are going to be more than external obstacles, internal. So for me, my career looking back, I see the internal obstacles have been greater than the external. That is the insecurities, the doubt, the fears. Those are the things when I look back, I go, that was probably more important than some random mediocre guy saying something ridiculous in the middle of trial, right? It's really how I internalized that, how I felt about that, how I responded when I was younger from my fear or my insecurity, versus now that I'm retired. Listen, I am who I am. You get what you get, right? I'm always going to be kind, but you're going to just get who I am now because I'm too old to care about, certain things, right? So I don't think you have to unlearn your instinct because, let's just face it, instinct and intuition are some things that women have. And I think sometimes women, female lawyers and female judges have this thing when you're in court and things are happening and the men are barreling through it. And the women sometimes see the things that other people aren't seeing. And we're like, hey, wait a minute, let's take a beat here. So I don't think we have to unlearn that intuition and that instinct, but we do have to make sure that it's not our emotions that are kind of pushing us around. So this is what I would say with regard to instinct. Learn to trust yourself. As the judges, we make decisions so quickly. We hope we're right. We've studied, we know the law, we know the case, but sometimes we're just not right. And that's what the appellate court is for. And I think that's what age has taught me. Listen, do the best that you can. Make the decisions. Jump in. If you feel like your instinct is saying, I need to speak up, then do that. Sometimes you're going to be right. Sometimes you're going to be wrong. That's okay. If you get comfortable with who you are as a person, the instinct will be stronger, right? And you will know when to take a beat, when to cool it down and when to come in hot. Sometimes you need to come in hot. But I would say trusting yourself is kind of the most important thing. And you got to get to know yourself. You got to get out there, mix it up, and learn how you're responding to things. And that's just where the confidence comes in. And that's going to just take time. But, you know, trust yourself and deal with those internal obstacles. Sometimes it's not always the outside. Sometimes it's the internal things that are causing us to shrink back. And I just need you to know, young women and men, if you're out there, but what I need you to know is that you are capable, right? And you are worthy. And so you've got to trust that. You've got to trust that in yourself. It's easy for me to say it at 55, right? Having retired, and you might be 25, but just keep the course, keep doing your thing, keep trusting yourself, keep showing up as your very best. And these things with regard to instinct and you know how to do it, it will come to you, I promise you. But go ahead and make sure that you preside over that internal part of yourself. The outward obstacles are going to come and go, but you live with you. So make sure you're dealing with the doubt and insecurity and the fears, because they're going to come up, and you don't want them to come up in the heat of the moment. You want to deal with those things so you can be your true, authentic self when you step into the boardroom or the courtroom or wherever it is that you go. I'm sorry, I might have taken a little long on that one.
It's all good. We still have time. But that segues very nicely into the last question, and this is for all of you, which is, it's about this concept of reasonableness. And just anecdotally, I think when I used to be a tenant attorney, so I used to defend evictions in San Francisco. And one thing that I always encountered, both just generally, was all this pressure of people telling you to be reasonable, right? And maybe that was like concept of a certain settlement offer, right? It's like, be reasonable, or why is your client so unreasonable? And like, maybe judges are saying that. They're like, why are you wasting my time trying to push this to trial? Like, this is unreasonable. Why won't your client accept this? Whatever. And so, you know, I say that in the context of litigation, but I think just generally there can be a push to be quote unquote reasonable, but also, you know, looking at everyone's, you know, with all you guys here and explaining your career path, I think, you know, pushing the bounds of that is kind of necessary and important to not just get a good result for your client if you're trying to do something new, but also, you know, to forge your own path and not kind of subscribe necessarily all the time to, well, this is what society tells me what is reasonable, or this is what a judge is always telling me what is reasonable, or what opposing counsel is telling me I need to do for my client because that's reasonable, right? So thinking about like your career and your trajectory, how do you think you've been able to push the bounds of what people have told you is reasonable? And maybe that can be in your personal, you know, not necessarily maybe as a litigator or as a judge, but just generally it can go a lot of different directions. So I'll start with Judge Evangelista.
Well, being a public defender for so long in the courtroom, I could almost have the recording in my head to say, oh, what you're saying now, be reasonable, right? Because then there's like an implicit criticism that you're not being. But the truth of it is, though, that only you know your case, right? You know your case the best. And if you're holding a full house, right? Like the judge and opposing counsel will never know what you've got up your sleeve. So I always used to hear that be reasonable, and I used to take it with a grain of salt, because I was like, I might not win today in this pretrial, but I'm going to win at the trial. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to get reasonable offers. So that's how I dealt with it in my career, right? Being dealt that line. And of course, you know, that topic came back again, you know, later on, you know, getting on the bench. But I didn't make the system that we have, but I definitely, as a judge now, can appreciate uh, the sacrifices that all judges make, when they go out and get appointed or when they run. Being an elected position, having a term for X amount and knowing that you can be challenged at any time is such a personal sacrifice. The risks involved, and almost being put in a position where we have tasks as judges that require us to be, let's say, for example, empathetic, but at the same time be completely neutral. Some of our tasks as judges are completely juxtaposed, and we're meant to balance this very thin, narrow line of neutrality in order to make sure that both sides feel like we're being neutral. And I think by definition, that's what we're supposed to be, is, reasonable or fair, as judges. I certainly can appreciate that so much every day. When the litigants are in my courtroom and it's the most important thing to them, and I can't blow it off. So I'm certainly not going to say be reasonable, because I've been there. So the fact that I was a public defender actually gives me a little insight to why litigation sometimes gets a certain way, right? I like that. That's why you need judges with different kinds of experiences. Public defenders make good judges, sure. They've been there, right? So it's taught me some empathy, but in a way that's, it's to both sides, really. You know what it's like not having your witnesses, despite having subpoenaed them. Yeah, be reasonable today. Kind of balancing everybody's interests. It's a great question. Philosophical.
Judge Chen?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think one of the things that I wanted to tell myself and tell younger attorneys when I was supervising and training was certainly don't lose yourself and your passion and your instinct and your trust of your gut, like Judge Brown was saying. And I think it's important for an effective attorney to know what reasonable is, to know whose reason are you appealing to know what is the judge looking for, and because reasonable is different. I mean, touching on the last question, when I worked for Department of Corrections, to figure out how, and going back to Judge Evangelista's thinking, empathy, understanding where other people are coming from. People reason differently, and understanding how their reasoning may not be how you choose to operate, but to know how they're reasoning and to be able to name that, or to know that you're departing from that and then explain why, I think it gives you a lot more credibility. So you don't have to lose your viewpoint, your passion, your advocacy, but you can't lose sight or ignore what is the judge looking for? How am I going to most effectively get through to these parole officers and teach them why due process is important? What is their chain of command and who they listen to? Or for the judge, what is the way that this needs to be presented? So that they see that I recognize their framework, and I am making a conscious decision to depart from that, because this case, this person, this life, I mean, life that comes into our courtrooms isn't rational, doesn't follow the trajectory of reason. And you might, meaning, judge or, whoever you're talking to, other attorney, you might think this way. And I see that. I could understand that, and here's why I am not going in that way. I mean, explaining my decisions all the time. I want to show the both parties. I heard and I understand where you're coming from. I'm not, um, and this is why I'm not agreeing with you, or this is why I'm sort of taking part of what you said and part of what you said. Or I think the strength comes in not changing yourself, but in growing an understanding of other people's what they think is reasonable, and then being able to address that head on.
Judge Brown?
All right. I'm just going to say I am so passionate about this question, this reasonableness question, because in my book, I tell people that I would not be sitting here but for the fact that I am completely and totally unreasonable. My high school counselor told me when I went to her and I said, hey, I want to be a lawyer. I'm on the west side of Fresno. And nobody really left Fresno and left this school. And she said, Shalini, you're such a good student. I really want you to think about doing something more reasonable. What about teacher? What about social worker? Great careers. But I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I would not even be here, but for the fact that I decided to be unreasonable. And I have continued to be unreasonable. It doesn't make any sense for a little girl picking strawberries in the Fresno heat to be on the bench. It is unreasonable. Women have the right to vote because we were unreasonable. I think Judge Chin, you said it right. Who's reasonable, right? If we stay reasonable, nothing will change. Civil rights, women's right to vote, there would be no change. So for me, my principle is be completely unreasonable at all times. Like I am unreasonable, which is why I'm here. Now, when I'm on the bench, yes, I am reasonable, but because we were all, attorneys and litigators, we understand that if you represent the underdog, you have to be unreasonable. Or why are you there? You're there to be unreasonable. Yes, you're following the rule of law. Yes, you're understanding that. But in my opinion, I guess I just take it so personally that if you want to get somewhere, if you want to do something unusual, if you want to represent and serve people, you have to be unreasonable. Reasonableness is going to get you status quo. And so for me, outside of the bench, of course, I would recommend to all of you to be completely unreasonable at all times when it comes to your career, your dreams, your hopes. Be unreasonable and just simply go for it.
That's a great note to end on. And we are a little over 6:35, so I don't want to hold people for too long, but we did want to open it up to the audience for at least a question or two. So, and we have the MCLE participation code in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves, drop a question in the chat, however you want to do it. If you have my number, you can text me. Ask a question. Now's your time to do that. We have a couple of minutes. Does anyone have any questions, or it doesn't even have to be a question, it can be a thought.
Well, you all did such a good job covering the groundwork that nobody has any questions.
Yeah, I was tempted to cold call someone, but I won't do that. So anyway, okay. Well, like I said, we're slightly over 6:30, so we're gonna let everyone go. But thank you so much for taking the time, Judge Brown, Judge Chen, and Judge Evangelista. We got a positive comment from Teresa and Sarah in the chat. So this is recorded. We will share it to you all, and if you want to share it to anyone else, feel free to do that. But we hope you have a lovely rest of your evening, And yeah, thank you again, judges, for taking the time and just being so thoughtful with your responses and just working with us at the Queen's Bench to make this happen. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.